Good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Arnold Weinfeld. I'm Associate Director at the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research at Michigan State University. I want to welcome you all here to our first fall forum. Welcome back. Just a couple of announcements before we get going. For those of you who are interested or know anyone who might be interested, applications are open for our Michigan Political Leadership Program until September 29th. As many of you know, this is a 10-month, one weekend a month program for those who are interested in running for elected office at some point in their career. We've been, 30 years now, have over 750 graduates from the program, many of them in elected office in the legislature or in local government or as judges even. And our current Secretary of State is a graduate of the program. I want to introduce to you Linda Cleary in the back from our MPLP program. If you have any questions about that, you can ask Linda, and Tony Zammit, our Communications and Events Manager. And Tony has started a somewhat of a new communication for folks. We'll be sending out an IPPSR newsletter once a month with the information about our events and programs, so be on the lookout for that. I believe our next forum is on October 11th. So as I said, welcome. I think we've got a great panel here to present some important information on Michigan demographic trends, the challenges that we face in growing our population, but then also some ideas and initiatives on how to grow that population that the administration is working on. So with that, I'm going to introduce the director of IPPSR, Matt Grossman, to share a little bit of introduction. Matt.
Thanks and welcome. I'm sorry we ran out of food. Please register in advance if you can, so we get a good sense of who's coming. And again, October 11th will be the next one. And we will hope to continue the theme, so it won't be on exactly the same topic, but we hope to have several forums that are relevant to Michigan's population growth and how to retain and attract residents. I couldn't resist the opportunity to show you a few pretty maps, because we have done in the past surveys of Michigan college graduates for across all of the universities for where they would like to end up, where they're going, why they've chosen where they ended up. And overwhelmingly, people like Michigan who go to college here. That's not too surprising. But when they go elsewhere, it's overwhelmingly for one of two reasons. Number one is that they came from elsewhere and moved here for college and are going back. And number two is that they got a better job opportunity somewhere else. So although we might think that people want to move elsewhere, they don't necessarily. So we gave them a map of the U.S. And of Michigan. And one of the things that we asked them was just where they could see themselves living over the long term, and these are the results. And so you can see there are hot spots along all of the East Coast and in the West Coast major cities and in Denver. But overwhelmingly, people want to stay close by, and to the extent that there's an attractive major city, it's Chicago more than anything else. Then we asked them where in Michigan they might want to go. There we go. And there's quite a few places in Michigan which are attractive for long-term residents of Michigan college graduates, including our major cities, and everywhere that there is a college in Michigan, there are people who want to stay around the area that they went. So it's not statewide, but there is a lot of interest in staying in Michigan if we can provide the opportunities for our graduates. So that's just to set the tone for today. Does that mean I'm introducing the first speaker?
I can do that.
Okay. Hand it back over to Arnold.
So I'll introduce our speakers now. And there we go. So our speakers today include Julia Rapaport, who's Director of Public Engagement and Strategy for the Grow Michigan Together Council. Before that, Julia worked in the Executive Office of Governor Whitmer in a variety of roles. A Michigan State graduate, yay!
Go Green.
Hawaii. In 2019, a born and raised Michigander. Also speaking today will be Eric Lupher. Ehrlich has been president of the Citizens Research Council since September of 2014. He's been with the council since 1987, where he has researched such issues as state taxes, state revenue sharing, highway funding, unemployment insurance, and do I go down this list here? Long list. His recent work has focused on local government matters, including intergovernmental cooperation, governance issues, and municipal finance. Eric holds a BA in International Relations from James Madison College at Michigan State University. Wow, we're doing great.
Go Green.
And a Master's in Public Administration from Wayne State University. Now here's where we go off the rails. Also speaking today will be Dr. Gabriel Ehrlich, who's an economic forecaster at the University of Michigan, where he is the director of the university's research seminar in quantitative economics. He's published widely in academic journals. His research has been discussed in The Economist, The Financial Times, and The Washington Post. And of course, as many of you know, Gabe oversees RSQE's forecasts of the U.S. and Michigan economies, and he presents regularly to the legislature and governor about Michigan's economic and fiscal prospects. Prior to joining RSQE, Gabe worked as an economist at the Congressional Budget Office, and he received his PhD in economics from the University of Michigan. And we're going to start off with Gabe, and then move to Eric, and then Julia. So Gabe, you're up. Good. There we go.
Oh, look at this guy. Getting the slideshow up successfully. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Arnold and Matt, for inviting me to be here today. And I'm here with my colleague, Mike McWilliams, who will also help me answer any questions. So I'm happy to summarize our long-run economic forecast for the state of Michigan and its counties. And this is something that RSQE does approximately every 5 years. The project was sponsored by the Michigan Department of Transportation, so our thanks go to them for their partnership and collaboration. And I'm going to show you a couple of alternative scenarios based on the transition to electric vehicles. And those were sponsored by the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, so our thanks go to them as well. And I just wanted to say our full reports, both for the baseline forecast and for the alternative scenarios, are on our website. The nice thing about having an unusual name is we're the first thing that comes up. If you Google RSQE, we should be the first link. And so you can see the full reports there. But I'll just be providing a high-level summary today. Okay, so I'm going to skip most of the details regarding the assumptions about the U.S. economy that went into our forecast for Michigan. But one thing I did want to touch on briefly, because it comes up all the time when we talk about the long-run future for Michigan, is the transition to electric vehicles, and how we are seeing it and thinking about it. And obviously we're interested to hear your perspectives also. And just the elephant in the room when you talk about EVs and the transition here in Michigan is that many analysts believe that it's going to require less labor to build and assemble electric vehicles than traditional internal combustion engine vehicles. There are fewer parts, just takes less labor to put them together. That kind of basic logic translates through to ancillary services that provide repair and maintenance services, gas stations, all of those things. But on the other hand, the transition will require a major increase in capital spending on new manufacturing plants for EVs and the charging infrastructure, and that should increase employment, both in construction but also in the new equipment manufacturing industries and battery manufacturing. And so I just wanted to give you in this slide a very rough sense of our baseline forecast for the transition to electric vehicles. We projected that about 10% of U.S. new vehicle sales in 2025 would be totally electric, so 100% EV. And that percentage would climb to about 25% in 2030 and about 55% in 2040. And then by 2050, 100% of new vehicle sales will be all electric. But newly sold EVs will replace the existing fleet with a long delay, right? Cars last a long time. And so under our assumptions, legacy non-electric vehicles will remain in the fleet long past 2050, and you can see basically at 2050 is when about half of the fleet will be EVs in our projections. So that just kind of gives you a sense of our approximate timeline for the transition to EVs. And by and large, our projections are a little bit slower than we've seen from other sources. We've heard people who think that the transition will take longer, and obviously anytime you're projecting out to 2050, there's a lot of guesswork, frankly, that goes into it and assumptions. But that's about where we see it. And the relatively slow adoption of EVs in our forecast means that they're going to have a relatively minor impact on employment in motor vehicle manufacturing in the short run here in Michigan, and also nationally. And in fact, just initially, the introduction of EVs should help to sustain employment in auto manufacturing, because companies are going to need to produce both types of vehicles, both ICE vehicles and EVs, right? And so, during the period that there's large-scale production of both types of vehicles, that's actually going to boost employment. And so, with that in mind, you can see that we expect employment to hold, roughly steady through about the mid-2030s. So rising through this year and reaching about 960,000 jobs, so just shy of 1 million jobs nationally. And then beginning to decline slowly through about 2032, but really holding flat, you can see on the graph. But then you can see a decline begins in earnest as we start phasing away from producing ICE vehicles, and it's only EVs that are being produced. That's where you see the graph turn down and a decline in motor vehicle manufacturing employment, such that by 2050 we expect employment in the industry to be just above 800,000 jobs nationally. And obviously, if the transition occurs more quickly than we anticipate, the job losses will come more quickly than we have forecast. Okay, so that's all I was going to say about the national economy, but I wanted to situate our forecast for Michigan in that context. And so with that, I'm going to turn to the topic that I was invited to discuss today, which is Michigan's population and trends. And Matt told us to aim for 15 minutes, and I decided nobody's ever been disappointed if an economist finishes up early, so I'm going to try to keep it brief. So, I just want to say, though, as an economist, look, population growth here in Michigan represents a speed limit for job growth in the long run. And this is something we've been saying for a long time, but it's something we're especially feeling now. It's a time of very tight labor markets, and we really feel it here in Michigan. Look, if we want to keep growing the economy at a solid clip, and we want to keep adding jobs, we also need to be adding workers. And so just the more people we have, the more job growth we can sustain as well. Michigan's population did reach a new record high just before the pandemic of just shy of 10,080,000 people in 2019. 10,078,000. In 2020 and 2021, the state population declined, as you can see here on the graph, due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And we were projecting, when we produced this forecast, an additional decline of about 5,000 people in 2022. But our projection was for the population to start growing again this year and to keep growing to a peak of actually above 10,500,000 in 2046. So you can see kind of where we hit the peak there is the year 2046, and then you can see the population levels off and declines just a little bit through 2050 as the population ages. And so, that's actually pretty good. And I should say, by the way, one thing is that, if we were to extend the axes on this graph and show from zero, this looks like pretty good growth, but if we were to start the axis at zero, it would look a lot less impressive. And the other thing to say is we're relatively optimistic relative to some of the other forecasts you see out there. So this is probably a guardedly optimistic scenario for Michigan's population. And when you put it in the context of national growth, we're lagging the U.S. population through 2050. And so this slide shows you, our forecast of Michigan's share of the U.S. population, and it's declining because even though Michigan is growing throughout most of our forecast, the U.S. population is growing faster. We're forecasting that Michigan's population will grow at an average rate of about 0.15% per year between 2020 and 2050. And that's about a third of the US growth rate we're forecasting, which is about 0.44% per year, right? And that's why this line is declining on the graph, Michigan's share of the US population. Okay, there's a lot going on this slide, and I'm going to do my best to walk you through it, but it's really where the rubber meets the road in terms of population growth. It's all of the components of state population growth. So there's what we call natural growth, there's domestic migration, and there's international migration. And then what we've further split domestic migration into the population ages 64 and younger, and then senior citizens 65 plus. The gray line shows net international migration to Michigan. And international migration is a very important source of population growth for the state. It slowed down dramatically during the pandemic, but it has been picking up, and we do expect it to keep picking up going forward, to getting back towards a more normal pre-pandemic level, adding about 22,000 people per year to Michigan's population in our forecast. That's about 2% of total U.S. international migration, so Michigan does not attract, we're about 3% of the national population, give or take. So, we don't attract our fair share, so to speak, of international migrants. If you want to, think about it that way. The yellow line on the graph shows net migration of the population aged 65 or older. And you can see Michigan has basically been losing between 5,000 and 7,000 seniors per year who retire to other states. And we expect that trend to continue. Basically to stay pretty constant over the forecast. Domestic migration age 64 and younger is in the green line. And it tends to move around a lot more than the migration of senior citizens because it really reflects the state of Michigan's labor market. And so it fluctuates. And you can see, when the labor market was weaker at the beginning of the 2010s, we were losing, a very large number of people to other states, working age people. But we actually expect it to get to, roughly a net neutral in the short run here. And then for this rate to fluctuate based on the relative tightness of Michigan's labor market versus the nation's. And it just reflects the reality, and as Matt mentioned, that workers will tend to migrate to states with high labor demand and where wages are higher. And so we were consistently losing people in the 2010s, but we expect tighter labor markets in the 2030s to draw people back in, although you can see we begin to lose people again, migrants again, later in the forecast to other states in the country. And then finally, I just want to touch on natural growth, which is in the blue line. That's births minus deaths. And it's probably the most important line for the story here. During the pandemic, Michigan experienced reduced births and increased deaths. So, both elements of natural growth were going in the wrong direction. And that meant that population growth in Michigan really, fell off a cliff, especially natural population growth. We do expect to get to positive natural population growth here in Michigan again by 2024. So that's kind of the highest, if you look at the blue line, that's the peak of the blue line in the forecast period there. And then we expect a steady decline after that. And this is it's a really important trend for people to understand. The number of births declines every year after 2024 in our projections, while the number of deaths increases. So that by about 2040, the number of deaths actually exceeds the number of births in Michigan each year. And that means that natural population growth turns negative, right? The blue line goes below zero. And so that's the kind of underlying reality that people around the state are thinking about when they think about the population challenge. And so looking at this figure, you can see that there's only one line that really remains in positive territory throughout, and that's international migration. And by the back half of our forecast, it's really doing all of the heavy lifting in terms of population growth here in the state. But again, the kind of the steady decline of natural population growth here in Michigan is one of the biggest stories, and it's one of the things I hope you'll take away from this presentation. Next, I'll show you our forecast of population by age. There are a few important trends to notice when you look at this slide. First is that you can see in the blue line that the population of young people aged 24 or younger slowly declines as the number of births declines. And then in yellow, you can see the overall aging of the population. Michigan's population aged 65 or older has been increasing rapidly. It's going to continue to increase rapidly until the second half of the 2030s in our forecast. And after that, it flattens out due to the combination of seniors leaving the state or passing away. And then the prime working age population in Michigan, so people aged 25 to 64, is in the green and gray lines. And between 2020 and 2029, the prime working age population is actually projected to decline by 145,000 people in Michigan. And what that means is that employers are going to have a very hard time finding workers over the course of this decade. And I can tell I need to speed up, so I'm going to we'll go into the lightning round here. This slide shows you our forecast of state employment using the PEA measure, which can look a little bit different than the BLS statistics you're used to seeing. Obviously, we lost a lot of jobs in the pandemic, but we're forecasting that Michigan's recovery should get employment back up about 2% higher than the 2019 level by 2024. And you can see we expect the recovery to continue in decent growth into the early 2030s, but then employment growth is going to slow down dramatically, and there's actually an 8-year stretch in the 2030s when we basically don't expect state employment to grow at all. And again, that comes back to the demographics. We're just not going to have the people to sustain rapid job growth. Okay, and I will try to go quickly through these scenarios, but one thing we did want to look at is, well, what would happen if Michigan doesn't make as successful a transition to the EV future as we projected in our baseline. And so the blue line in these graphs that I'm going to show you shows our baseline scenario for the transition to electric vehicles. The green line shows a transition where we move to EVs more quickly than in our baseline that I showed you at the beginning. And then the yellow line shows you a scenario where not only do we transition to EVs more quickly, but Michigan is relatively unsuccessful at making the switch. And I can talk about the assumptions underlying that in more detail later. And essentially what you can see is in the green line, we don't have as much auto employment in the state of Michigan as we do in the blue line, where there's a slower EV transition. But the really bad news is if Michigan loses market share as we switch to EVs, if we don't make the transition successfully. And in that faster EV adoption and loss of market share scenario, Michigan's job count in auto manufacturing falls actually to under 90,000 jobs by 2050, relative to about 150,000 in our baseline scenario. Right, so it would definitely be a big challenge for Michigan's economy. And that feeds through to total employment statewide, because every job in the auto sector here in Michigan supports multiple jobs statewide. The auto sector, it's largely an export sector, and it does support multiple jobs in the state. So again, our blue line shows our baseline forecast for state employment that I just showed you. The green line shows, well, what would happen if we transition more quickly to EVs, but then the yellow line shows, well, what if Michigan, we transition more quickly to EVs and Michigan has a hard time making the switch. And in that yellow line scenario, statewide employment is actually lower in 2050 than our projection for 2025. So it basically has the potential to wipe out 25 years of the job growth that we're forecasting if we don't make a successful switch to electric vehicles. And I won't do that. That's kind of enough of a bummer as it is. So I won't dwell on, but I'll just say, that has the same effects on population, as you might expect. You can see we actually lose population in that yellow line scenario where we don't make a successful switch to EVs in the forecast. Okay, so I'm going to talk very briefly about the distribution of population growth we see for the state going from 2020 to 2050. The red and orange lines in this map are counties that lose population in our forecast, and then the green colors are counties that gain population. We're projecting total population growth for the state of about 4.5%, and you can see it's not spread evenly. We're actually expecting about 45 counties to lose population compared to only 38 counties that gain population. And I think if you looked at Matt's maps from the surveys, you can see a lot of overlap, I think, between the green parts of this map and the heat map that Matt showed us. So I won't dwell too much on that. This slide shows you our forecast for county level total employment change. We start in 2019 to avoid the effects of the pandemic, but the color scheme is pretty similar. And it's probably not going to surprise you that the colors on this map look pretty similar to the colors on the population map that I just showed you. Because again, we need to have people to support solid job growth here in Michigan. So I won't dwell on the details, but just to say, we're projecting a pretty similar path both for employment and for population as we look at the distribution across the state of Michigan. Finally, this slide shows you that we do expect, Michigan is going to be getting older as a state. So this slide shows on the left-hand side, the share of the population ages 65 or older in 2020, and then on the right, our projection for the year 2050. And you can see the colors are getting a lot darker. That means that there are more senior citizens in Michigan. So just by 2050, we're projecting that there will actually only be 3 counties in the state of Michigan with a senior population share that's less than 20%, and no counties in Michigan where the share is less than 17%. And that yellow color you can see on the left-hand map all of those counties are counties that today have a share of less than 17%. Okay, so that wraps up my remarks for today. I'll be really interested to hear the other panelists' remarks, and we're looking forward to the discussion. So thanks for having us.
Gabe. So I'm Eric Lupher with the Citizens Research Council of Michigan. See a lot of familiar faces in the room, so I won't spend a lot of time on this. The bottom line there, our website, if you're interested in the study that I'm about to talk about, this is where to find it. So a little more than a year and a half ago, we were approached by the Office of Foundation Liaison about doing some work looking at the population trends, both past and what we see in the future, and thinking about how that affects the economy, the workforce, the health, the infrastructure, environment, and the public services provided. And so we dug into that, and fortunately, right around that time, Gabe and his friends were putting out the population look forward, so we had something to work on, and we're indebted to them for the work that they did. Took that and produced it, and you're going to see a lot of what the slides that I talk about, you see sort of bi-directional, and I think you get a lot of what Gabe talked about, specifically with the economy, that you see the economy affects our population growth, and our population growth affects the economy, and that plays out in a number of ways. So last year at the RSQ, Gabe gave me the opportunity to stand up and give the preliminary findings of our report, and I said at the time, I see a lot of gray hair in the room to appreciate this, that I saw this as my Alice's restaurant. Right, the Alice's restaurant, if one person gets up, and people say, what are you talking about? And when 2 people get up, they start, and if enough people get up and say we have an issue, we need to do something about it, it becomes a movement. And you're going to hear from Julia that we've created a movement. So the bottom line that our report shows is that Michigan is losing its competitive edge. I liken it to the idea that we've been treading water. Right? We're not moving backwards. You look at economic measures, you look at the population numbers that Gabe presents, a number of different things. There is, for the most part, positive growth, but we're getting outpaced by 48 other states. Thank goodness for West Virginia that we're not 50th on many of these things. So when you look at household income, we've gone from one of the richest states in the nation to now 34th in the nation. K-12 education from one of the best systems in the nation to now our kids are scoring 36th in the NAEP standardized test given across the states. 39th in total health outcomes. 45th in electric service reliability. 47th in road conditions. And so as we talk about retaining our population, when we talk about attracting people to the state, we have to pay close attention to these numbers and think about what it means. And if you get anything out of what Gabe presented, it's that aging of the population. Our last decade, the first decade of this century, and sort of carrying over into this last decade, we've lost too much of our young population. And when you think about who's going to be the line worker of tomorrow, that's the easy part, but who's going to be the nurse to take care of me? Who's going to be the lawyer? Who's going to be the manager of the shops when we have all the young talent that's gone somewhere else to be in Chicago or Memphis or Los Angeles or whatever. So it's really that brain drain, it's the loss of that young talent that we really have to pay attention to going forward. So the bidirectional effect, in our report, we look at both how we compare to the national average, but we've also sort of draw a line around Michigan, who are immediate neighbors. And you can see here in terms of the household income, only Kentucky among our immediate neighbors has a lower household income than us. Just to keep things going here, we looked at the educational outcomes. And every state that we're comparing ourselves to is doing better. Their students are doing better on that national standardized test than Michigan. And this is the local, right, the Midwest states. If we were to pull in the East Coast states, the Massachusetts, the Connecticut, New Jersey, it would really dwarf our achievements on these types of tests. So this is are we preparing our students to be successful when they become adults? And the answer for the most part is our system is failing us. And this is not news, right? We have Lunch Michigan that's been working for years trying to figure out what are we doing wrong, how do we turn the ship around, how do we become a high achieving state? But when you start looking at how we compare to these other states, it really becomes significant. And what you see on this chart, we're plotting real personal income per capita against the percent of the population with at least an associate's degree, if not more. And you see the very high correlation there between the people with degrees and the per capita income in the state. It's good for the economy. So what are we doing? First of all, we've made education too expensive. And this is a national story, right? All of our kids are getting into school and graduating with all this debt, but Michigan compares very poorly to the rest of the nation. It is more expensive on average to send your kids to school in Michigan than it is for the rest of the nation. And then once they graduate, we're doing a poor job of keeping them. So just getting them into school is great, but that's not going to help us if they take that degree and go somewhere else. So the good news is we compare a little bit better than some of our surrounding states, but again, look how far away we are from Massachusetts or Connecticut, or some of the states we aspire to. So our study goes through a number of measures like that, looking at the workforce, looking at the economy, how are we comparing, where are the opportunities to build on success, to leverage success, and to do the things that we want to do. We also look at the health of our residents. And we've just chosen 4 measures here. Cancer prevalence, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity. If the screen were wide enough, we could put in many, many more, and they would all show that Michigan's population is generally in poor health. So as we think about the economy, as we think about the ability to attract workers, and the location experts in the different businesses say, well, do you have the skilled workers to be here? And we say, well, we don't really compare very well on education, and we're not retaining enough of our college graduates. And you say, well, are you healthy? Well, not really, and that means that people are not going to show up for work. Or you could look at the workforce participation. They're not even getting into the job market to fill jobs. If they do, they don't feel good, either physically or mentally, and so that affects the efficiency, the productivity of the businesses coming here. Our life expectancy in Michigan is lower than the U.S. average and lower than our competitor states. So Michigan is the bottom line. The neighboring states are the dotted line on top, and the U.S. average is the line in the middle. So even before the pandemic, for going on 20 years, we've had a lower life expectancy than the U.S. average. Started to catch up, and then our single state recession and the Great Recession kicked in. and we've really been trailing on that. What's driving that? You think about health and you say, well, you know, we have University of Michigan Health System, Sparrow Hospital down the road, the great hospitals in Detroit, clearly, in Grand Rapids, I should say, clearly we have the health system to bring about better results. But I point to the bottom slice of pie in this chart, you see that the clinical care is only a small share of what leads to good health outcomes. It's the social and economic factors, it's the physical environment, it's the health behaviors. So we have about average, or a little bit better than average, weekly exercise activity. Our residents say they're eating fruits and vegetables and the things that should keep them healthy. But on other behaviors, insufficient sleep, physical inactivity, excess drinking, excess smoking, e-cigarette use, all of our citizens, too many of our citizens, are doing the things that are contrary to good health. And that, again, first of all, leads to the shorter life expectancy, but also affects our ability to attract businesses and bring them in. And you think about the social and economic factors. Again, Michigan's the dark blue line on your left. Each of those bars is higher than the US average in the middle, or the Midwestern states on the right. Too many of our children growing up in poverty, too much food insecurity with our families, and the racial segregation. Something that we have sort of systematically grown into without really consciously making a decision to do, but it affects the health outcomes of too many of our residents, how we've segregated ourselves and then made hard decisions. Do I, in my community, want to do something to help the community next door? Those people don't look like me, those people don't have incomes like me. And it's really hampered us as a state. And that's hard to get over. I don't know how Growing Michigan Together Council, we put ourselves apart and now you want to pull us together. Good luck. And you think about, you know, here we are in Lansing, what can be done at the state level? Well, first of all, we have to address that for years, the state has abdicated its role, or in some ways diminished its role as a provider of public health services. We are 40th in the nation in spending on per capita spending on public health. Back in the Engler administration, they eliminated the Department of Public Health and distributed the services that used to be housed in that into Health and Human Services and agriculture and things like that, which is good. We're still doing many of those things, but if you don't prioritize those, if you don't put those people together so the right hand knows what the left hand is doing, it affects us. And the outcomes we see, I think, reflect years of doing that. Is that really significant? Well, I would suggest that the Whitmer administration just said that preschool and post-education isn't important enough, that they want to create MILey. Give it department, is that going to change anything? Well, it prioritized, it's very symbolic, and they've made the conscientious decision that having those people meeting together under the same roof, doing the things, is important enough. And I would suggest that public health. This is at the state level, and if we do the local government level, it's even worse, right? Our local government health departments can perform the money that they can get through the federal government, but there's very little of the state money or the county money to really support what they're doing. It is not going to surprise anybody for me to tell you that our roads are 47th in the nation, according to this measure. A roads funding gap of at least $4 billion annually. Some would say higher. That's something that we've just been kicking the can down the road. Good for Governor Whitmer that she bonded to try to fix the state roads, but our county and our municipal roads continue to deteriorate. Funding is part of it, but we have to systematically change what we're doing with the funding once we get it. The Einstein quip, doing the same thing over and over and expecting results is the definition of insanity. We're not using our money efficiently, and there's a whole bunch of things that we could be doing better. So our study goes through what I just showed you with transportation, talks about water and sewer, and the electric grid, and so many other things. And the bottom line, when we talk about efficiency, for so long we have emptied out our inner cities, Detroit, Flint, Kalamazoo, and so on, and people are living further and further away from those core cities. We've sprawled further and further away. And when you think about those developments, rarely is that the suburban style 1950s grid that you find in Livonia or Southfield or many other places. They are these winding roads. So we've put people further and further away, and we've built in such a way that it's really difficult to maintain the infrastructure. We haven't increased the funding significantly to maintain that infrastructure, so we're taking the same pot of pie and stretching it thinner and thinner and wondering why we're getting poor results. And then we think about the environment. So for the most part, Michigan, like most states, complying with federal Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, everything, we're doing much better. I don't want to diminish that. There is good news. But we have too many of our inner city, low-income neighborhoods, people of color, significantly affected by the agglomeration of different factors that lead to poor air quality, poor water quality, and you can just go through all the different types of contamination. Too often located too close to factories that have contaminated the land and the water, the air that they're breathing. So something to get our arms around as we think about the future. And then we do think about the future, and what do the scientists say? They say that the climate change is coming. And that doesn't mean that we're going to have significant, it's not the verge of the ice age, but they say the weather will be more variable, greater variability, leading to more drastic, heavy rainfalls. The tornadoes that just rolled through 2 weeks ago, an example of that, 7 different touchdowns of the same system as it rolled through the state. The severe freeze that we had a couple of years ago, the polar vortex they called it. So preparing for that, part of that is being able to protect the people from that, but part of it is the infrastructure, and it's really making the investments in the infrastructure we should be making anyways, but it's not just fixing the 1960s and 70s system that we had in place, but thinking about if we're going to have greater rainfalls, do we have a storm sewer capacity to handle that? Do we have an electric grid capable of staying, keeping the power on with a gust of wind? I say that coming from Livonia, where somebody sneezes too hard, the electricity. Our environment should be the greatest selling point, right? Come to Michigan, the pure Michigan. We've got the Great Lakes, the inland waters, the rivers, the Tour Forest. So much to sell and why people would want to come here. We've got to talk about that and be the selling point so that when Mississippi and Florida is so hot and so deprived of water and they're saying, where can I go and be safe? They're thinking about Michigan as the place they want to be. But if we don't get ahead on the infrastructure and those environmental things, the beauty of a lighthouse out on the lake isn't going to be enough to attract them and keep them. So, the bottom line, we've got to harden our infrastructure, we've got to get ahead of these types of things, and part of that is the funding, right? So, as we think about state government, this year, highest revenue picture for state government historically. But when you go back to 2000 and adjust for inflation and the growth of state revenue, you can see that we're 20% below where we were back in 2000 in an inflation adjusted term, and 40% below just looking at real versus inflation adjusted. So does the state have the capacity to address all these things I've been talking about? It is trying to do the same things it has historically done with less money, and guess what? Doing poorly at it. Yeah, I equate it to boiling the frog. People know the story how to boil a frog. If you boil the water and put the frog in, the frog says, darn it, that's hot, I'm out of here. But if you put the frog in cold water and slowly turn up the heat, the frog doesn't realize it. And my contention is that we are the frogs. We've been in Michigan and slowly the roads have deteriorated, slowly the health of our residents have deteriorated, slowly the cash assistance, the environmental regulations have deteriorated because the state doesn't have capacity and we've deprived our local governments. And guess what we got? Among the worst roads, contaminated water in Flint, dam collapse in Midland, unintended pollution affecting us, struggling education system, and a state population in poorer health than most other states. And that's at the state level. When you think about the local government level, with the being deprived of the state revenue sharing that was promised to it years ago, and they're getting a fraction of what they would be getting there, and the property tax system that's set up to grow at a minimum rate, good for us taxpayers, poor for the local governments. And there isn't really tax alternatives. Most other states have a sales tax, so that when we do have thriving communities, they win. Economic activity is captured and they have the capacity to do things. So as a result, we have fewer police and firefighters in the forces. We have the transportation, the municipal road system, and the water and sewer. So that's it. This is the presentation I've been giving in a nutshell. I'm happy to give the full presentation if you have any sort of group that would like to hear it. I encourage an open bar during the presentation. It's not good news. But the step one is we have to admit that we have a problem before we can start addressing it. And so with Gabe's help, with the help of RSQE, we've created a movement thinking about the Alice's restaurant, and we want to keep that movement going. And that's a perfect segue, I think, to how we're going to address these things.
Hi, everyone. Well, I may not have all the answers, but at least I won't win the award for most depressing speaker. So I'm really thrilled about that. Thanks for having me. I work for the Grow Michigan Together Council, and so I'm going to spend time today talking about this initiative that we've launched in state government, kind of the process that we're in now. We are well underway into our sprint to get policy recommendations and kind of speak overall to the mandate that we have broadly. You know, I think the governor is aware that the council is the first step into addressing a lot of the issues that Gabe and Ehrlich brought up. It certainly won't be the last, so this is a good benchmark. For those of you who aren't aware about the Grow Michigan Together Council, the governor launched the council this year at the Mackinac Policy Conference. I believe the date was June 1st. For all of you on the island, probably were there, stuck on the porch with many of us. But what's really exciting about the council, as well as the chief growth officer position that she announced, Hillary Doe, who's kind of leading the effort for the state of Michigan, is that we are the first state in the nation to look at stagnated population growth and tackle it head on, which gives us a really unique kind of opportunity to be leaders. The governor's really saying like, hey, you know, there's 18 other states that are suffering from stagnated and losing population, but we're going to be the ones to try to lead and solve the issue for the state of Michigan. We are planning and already well underway into our process, like I said, but we really have the advantage of taking some of the policies that other cities and states have implemented and seeing if they're a good fit for the policy report that the council will do. For example, you know, there's a remote work initiative in Tulsa where I believe they gave out $10,000 grants to remote workers who moved there. Is there something there that Michigan can do? We're looking through all those things. And the exciting thing about the work and the mandate is that it's broad. like I said, the governor knows that this is gonna be something that lives well beyond the council and is a challenge that we're gonna have to face for some time. So there's kind of three main branches of work that the general Grow Michigan effort kind of centers around. First is policy. Like I said, the council is gonna help us kind of paint those policy recommendations and programs that can help us kind of turn around a lot of these issues that you heard about today. We have the ability to launch pilots and other programs to test new infrastructure initiatives, education programs, talent and retention programs, what have you. And lastly is a marketing and branding mandate. I think everyone knows that Michigan has a really great story to tell. We have the natural resources, we have amazing, humble, hardworking people. We have the cities, we have urban, beauty, agriculture, you name it, you can find it in Michigan. And so part of our job as this kind of process progresses will be also helping to brand and tell Michigan's story, both, to the United States, but frankly, internationally as well. One thing we're really aware of with the council in particular is that, kind of in the old age, if you built jobs, people would come. But these days, workers are looking for a diverse offering of things from the places that they live to culture, in their cities, solid transportation and infrastructure services, a strong and vibrant economy, right? And so we plan to try to tackle all of that through the council process. The Grow Michigan Together Council is made up of 27 members. We have a bipartisan council that we've put together. 8 of the members are non-voting, some officials in state government like the state budget office, director of labor and economic opportunity, etc. And our co-chairs, for those of you who don't know, are Governor Shirley Stancato from Wayne State University and Ambassador John Rakolta, who was an appointee in the Trump administration. So we have a good political diversity on our council, and they are well underway with their work. I'm going to get into a little bit of how they are going to put together a policy report that's due to the governor. That report is due December 1, and this was launched in June. So we are on a very tight and aggressive timeline. To help assist with that, the report and kind of recommendations are going to be broken up into 4 main kind of policy buckets, if you will, that I'll go over briefly for you. Each of those buckets, have a work group assigned to them with an additional 18 or so folks, give or take, to help us come up with those policy recommendations that will then go to the council for them to deliberate, vote on, and ultimately decide which pieces will go in the report. So overall, in case you're counting, we have over 100 people just about working on this initiative across the state and in all sorts of different companies and positions in the state of Michigan. So we're in good hands for sure. The 4 main kind of work groups and issues that the report's going to focus on, one of them is infrastructure in place. Like I said, making sure that we have a good infrastructure foundation from roads and bridges, but also supporting, the multimodal transit that exists in Michigan now. And also the infrastructure group is really going to focus on placemaking. That's something I think you hear a lot, especially from the 18 to 34-year-old folks coming out of college. People want to move to places where there's things going on, concerts, events in the city, etc. So infrastructure in place will focus on that as well. We have jobs, talent, and people. They're really focused on, workforce preparation, talent retention, and attraction programs, and reducing barriers for people to get into the workforce. One of the things, if you read the executive order, which is not a very interesting read unless maybe you're a lawyer, that's maybe how I feel, but you'll notice that equity and opportunity are words that come up repeatedly, both in the charge of the council and in the charge of each of the work groups. We are acutely aware that Michigan has had a long-standing issue with equity and opportunity, as well as that there are communities of color that are growing at fast rates, while other populations are not, and we need to make sure that all Michiganders have the opportunity to access resources. We will be a better and stronger economy if everyone has the same opportunities. And then there's a higher education work group. Their main charge is to focus obviously on workforce attraction and retention as well, but also affordability, again, to make sure we have an equity of opportunity to all of our higher education institutions. And lastly, we have a pre-K-12 work group that's focused on really making our pre-K-12 system not a liability to talent attraction and retention, but really an asset. better schools will help families who may have a job offer between here and, our neighbor to the south want to come here because our systems will be more robust. And we want to make sure that our pre-K-12 is creating the thinkers, workers, entrepreneurs, artists, etc. Of tomorrow. So the work group process is kind of where we are now. Our work groups are hard at work. The work groups wrap in mid-October. So they stood up in August. They wrap in mid-October. They are thinking of all sorts of policy recommendations throughout their subject areas that will then go to the council. And then the council has between mid-October to about early December to decide what will be in the final report. To assist with our work groups, we're standing up field hearings right now. Those are a way that we can bring in experts from around the country to kind of speak on some policy successes that have existed in other places. Richard Florida came and spoke to our Jobs, Talent, and People work group talking about, an idea of maybe making our college towns more robust, working on some of those pipeline and placemaking things that would help us retain talent. And we plan to do that for most of our work groups as well. At the same time, all of this is happening while we have our work groups and the council deliberating and in conversation. We are also launching a really robust public engagement calendar, and that's where I come in. I'm leading that charge for the council. We're really trying to meet people anywhere we can get them. This means, meeting people at existing cultural events. For example, we're probably going to have a table at Art Prize in Grand Rapids in 2 weeks to get people while they're enjoying the art, enjoying, there's a soccer tournament that's built in, meeting people where they are, getting their feedback via survey, and getting to hear kind of what they think about the state of Michigan. We're speaking at conferences, hosting public town halls to get feedback directly, and all sorts of stuff. So the public engagement is going all the way through December 1st. And our plan is to take all of the findings that we're getting both through surveys and through these really textured conversations we're having and giving those directly to the council for consideration. Like I said, we've already started and we're learning a lot. I think we all know that Michiganders are our greatest asset, and also talking to people is really where you figure out their pressure points and what it takes to help them succeed. We're learning a lot about what people are struggling with, what folks' favorite things are about living here. Our natural resources, no surprise, comes up a lot. The lakes, the dunes, all the fun things that you can do in Michigan, especially in the summer. And we're also kind of starting to notice some regional themes throughout, different communities we're speaking to. We were in the UP. They have some different thoughts than Traverse City, who has some different thoughts than Macomb County. And that's really helpful because I think what we're finding is that some of these issues and some of the growth patterns, as Gabe and Ehrlich pointed out, are not even across the state. And so some things are gonna take a more regional approach to address. And so getting that textured feedback will help the council identify what programs and policies may be successful in certain areas versus others, and maybe what's a candidate for like a statewide implementation piece. The other thing that we're highlighting is obviously the governor talked about her what's next address, which was a good tee up again into the clean energy, new manufacturing, infrastructure space. And the listening tour is really helping us kind of build off those things that came up during that address as well, to help steer the council and help lead Michigan to the future. So we definitely don't have all the answers yet to all of these really challenging problems that were identified, but we definitely are getting a good start to do so and are confident in the process that we're running, both with the council and the public engagement, that it'll give us what we need to be successful. As we know, Michigan is not winning the net migration issue. We're particularly concerned about folks from 18 to 34. In particular, I'm really trying to focus a lot of our engagement, especially in the early half, on college students at campuses. We did a few move-in events, anything from doing one of those student event affairs where if they filled out a survey, I handed them a t-shirt, and safe to say, from a bunch of freshmen, I got mobbed who wanted free stuff, which was great, to, building a town hall like we're doing at Grand Valley in a few weeks. So we really want to make sure that we're hearing from those students. We have some plans to do some high school swings as well. Because like has been said earlier, we know that they want to stay. It's about making Michigan a place that they actually can. The really nice thing about the mandate that the governor's given us and kind of the tools in our toolbox is that we can really dream big about Michigan and our future. We've been telling our work group chairs and the council, like, no idea is too outlandish, no idea is too crazy. We have to dream big because the Michigan that we want, that all of us want, is gonna take big, bold ideas that probably haven't come out of Lansing before. So, you know, we're just gonna continue to market Michigan and all the beautiful places and people that we have to ensure that we can win this battle. But once the council turns in their recommendations on December 1st, then we'll go into implementation through the legislature and continuing that work. But we are really excited, and I just wanted to give a quick overview kind of on the work we're doing now because it's in flux. I don't have a ton of the solutions that the council may come up with to these problems, but we're excited about the process and looking forward to hearing from a lot of different folks across the state. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. All right. We are open for questions now, but since we were high on realism and a little dour, I'll try to start us off with a positive question and see if Gabe, if you showed us those lines that you might be wrong, and if you're wrong on the negative side, things could be worse than you expected. What's the best you might be wrong positive case scenario, such where your assumptions might be wrong in a way that makes us look better?
Thanks, Matt, and Mike, if you want to hop in, by all means. You know, there are a couple of things. One is, Michigan has lagged the nation in terms of what you might think of as white collar, professional and business service employment. And that includes, parts of the tech industry. So I think if we were more successful in those areas and building a native tech cluster and tech industry, we have started to have some success in the finance industry for a long time. Something we would point out is, if you compare, for instance, the Detroit area to Pittsburgh, one thing that jumps out is Pittsburgh had, some of the advantages that have helped Pittsburgh really recover from, the post-industrial landscape are, strong health cluster and a strong finance industry. We're starting to see a growth of a native finance industry, here in Michigan. Certainly the high interest rates and high mortgage rates have hurt that because we've been focused in the mortgage, space primarily. But I do think if we were to develop, a tech, more of a native tech cluster, continue to develop our finance industry and continue to, develop those high value added professional industries, that would be, a very positive development for the state. And it's something that, is something we could do potentially, so.
And then, if I could jump in here too, I mean, we've talked a lot about population, you've heard a lot about population growth, and Gabe presented our fairly pessimistic outlook for natural population growth and migration to the extent that can be turned around. I mean, the natural growth is a hard ship to turn around. A lot of it is the built-in aging of the population. There's not much we can do about that, but to the extent we can retain residents and get more residents in, that would also put some upward pressure on those kind of sour graphs that we showed at the end of the talk.
Great. Arnold's available with the mic for those who have questions.
So, Gabe, the examples you just gave, white collar. I have a public policy research firm based in Lansing, and we've just decided to become a virtual company. 3 of the last 4 people that we've hired are not living in Michigan, because we're exactly the kind of company that our employees can be anywhere. And I guess, first I wonder if that is built into your assumptions, the effect of that virtual company post-pandemic. And secondly, it seems to me there may be some strategies around place that we have to think differently about place making and its effect on growing our population.
Yeah, absolutely. So just the first thing to say, we try to be pretty conservative in terms of what we assumed about the effect of remote work. And also I should note climate change, because one of the questions we always get is, well, did you affect, or, Eric mentioned climate I think is the, so no, we tried to be pretty conservative about building that in, especially because when we were, producing the forecast, it was still relatively early coming out of the pandemic and trying to figure out, well, what is the landscape going to look like in the long run. But yeah, I think all of those comments are very well taken.
Hi, let me follow on Rob's question a little bit and Gabe some of your comments. For full disclosure, I used to work full-time at PPA, which is Rob's company. So, and I am very proud of that fact. Since I moved to Michigan almost 50 years ago, I have been hearing virtually every single year some comment or other regarding the need for Michigan to diversify its economy. Every single year, or at the very worst, every other year or every election cycle. And what I'm asking, since this never has been taken very seriously or enough energy has been put into it, and Gabe, you did mention a few things which I'm sure is on everybody else's mind. What suggestions or what opportunities do each of you who spoke today, can you address that issue very specifically? What can Michigan do? What should Michigan do to diversify our economy, especially away from the auto industry?
Well, actually, I'm gonna, while these guys think about that, Larry, I've been here for 45 years, and when I first came to MSU back then, this region was a three-headed monster. It was GM, it was state government, and it was MSU. Well, this region now has more people directly employed in the insurance industry than we do in auto manufacturing. So I think when you look at the state and its efforts to have a more diverse economy, I think that's been done on a regional basis in particular. I think you can see that in Oakland County, in Washtenaw County, in this region, and certainly in Kalamazoo and Grand Rapids areas. And are we still somewhat reliant on auto manufacturing? Absolutely, it's still a huge component. But I guess we could argue, have we been too slow? What are the other reasons? All of that goes around with it. But I do push back a little bit when people say we've done very little to diversify our economy.
I have one thought really quick that has come up a bit throughout our jobs, talent, and people work group. It definitely kind of touches on diversifying the economy, but I think in general, one of the things that work group in particular and the council will have to reckon with is the future of manufacturing and how many different industries will rely on manufacturing and how the manufacturing of tomorrow, as clean energy becomes online, as different technologies develop, is going to look a lot different than what people think of as traditional manufacturing in the 1950s. And so that's something we're thinking about trying to tie into the work group report as well. So I definitely don't have the answer other than that, but it's something we're thinking of and trying to think of ways to promote, especially to young people, like a manufacturing job can be a really good job and not what you traditionally think of when you go that route. So that's my one addition.
So it's intentionality, right? And we have 50 years of intentionality of identifying that we need to diversify. Our friend Lou Glazer would say that diversifying, just chasing manufacturing jobs is going to embed us into a low-income state. So as the MEDC and as our regional economic development agencies think about business attraction, I think they need to be very intentional about the employers paying higher wages, the college educated, and that's not the type of thing we're going to land with a multi-million-dollar SOAR grant. These are going to be micro developments in the different areas of the state. So we can't totally walk away from automotive manufacturing and SOAR but some intentionality of really identifying those high-paying jobs, the high-paying employers, and making Michigan attractive to them.
Can I just, if I can add, just, I work at the university, so I have to say this, but it has the advantage of being true, which is, you know, funding the state's university, we're extremely lucky in Michigan to have such a high-quality university system. And, you know, Eric mentioned, you know, the costs of sending our kids to university here in Michigan is going up as the state has, you know, stepped back on its funding. And, you know, I think we take it for granted a little bit that we're always going to have a really high-quality university system, and making sure we don't lose that advantage is important.
Do you expect the Grow Michigan Together Council to tackle some of the fundamental issues with our local government finance and our infrastructure finance that Eric kind of was touching on?
It's too early to say because they're still in, you know, the work group phase. And then once those get out, it will be deliberated and, you know, eventually voted on before it's turned in to the governor and the legislature in the final report. But nothing is probably off limits. I'm sure it's come up in some conversations, but I don't have an indication yet on what will kind of make it, especially when it comes to funding structures. But the executive order does mandate that, you know, infrastructure in place in particular recognizes some long-term funding structures for our different infrastructure, you know, projects, whether it's roads and bridges or our transit system. So it's an option, but too early to tell.
So I think it was about 15 or 20 years ago, I read about a statewide survey that was done here in Michigan. And the headline result was only 27% of parents thought getting a 4-year or farther beyond high school certification of some type was either very important or somewhat important. 27%. I think it was a week ago, I ran across a more recent study. The number is still 27%. Talent wants to be where talent is. And unless we can get past the psychological hurdle that Lou and other people have been arguing for all these years, we're still going to be stuck in some of these same ruts.
Okay.
Thanks for the presentations, especially Eric's. I really appreciate it. Investment capital is the fuel for economic growth. Economic growth creates new businesses, creates jobs, opportunity for people. As I look at the things that Eric said, I said, stay away from Michigan. It's a horrible place to invest. I listened to this young lady over here, ESG, DEI, electric vehicles, solar panels, windmills, that's all a bunch of crap, as far as I'm concerned. I look at the high business taxes here, the high personal taxes, the property taxes, I say stay away. Michigan's got a managed economy, it doesn't have a market economy. There's a lot of interference in the marketplace by state government and local government. Look at the governor's investment in these two batteries, PLA battery plants, one by Marshall and one by Cam Braley. All these kinds of things dissuade people from putting money into Michigan. And Michigan's got a lot of natural advantages. Look at the water supply. It's very advantageous. But you know that the electric grid is going to be, the power supply is going to go down with all this solar power and clean energy crap. Any comments? Thanks.
Well, I just say, thank you, because we need to have this conversation. We need to hear from different voices. And it is a lot of issues that we need to overcome, a lot of things we need to turn around. And especially want to hear from the young people. So I'm really encouraged that the hearing tour that's going on is very intentional about doing that. you know, everybody's entitled to feeling the way they do, and if you just keep it to yourself, then we're not gonna improve, so let's have that conversation.
I could not agree more. Thank you so much, and thank you for your question as well. I kind of feel like we definitely have a lot to think about in terms of, it seems like we know exactly what we need to do, we just refuse to actually do it. And so I do think we need to have those conversations, because you can't get up here and say that we know that we don't invest enough in X, Y, Z, why are people leaving our state? And we've been saying this, I've been around for over 20 years now. Hey, we don't invest enough in local government, we don't invest enough in local government, we don't invest in local government. Why are people leaving our state? And so I definitely think once the council gets their recommendations, the next step has to be actually putting together some sort of panel conversation to talk about why our elected officials refuse to address the funding issues in our state. We cannot continue to play like we don't know what the problem is when someone stands right here in front of us and says, hey, by the way, we've just continually disinvested in our infrastructure over the last 20 years. And not to mention that we know we have the ability to increase that revenue. Now, local governments, I will say, have done an absolutely amazing job of trying to fill in that gap and doing the most with the least. But our state elected officials need to at least address the fact that they haven't even really tried to solve the main problem that we have here in our state, which is funding.
I guess I'll ask one final question, which is that obviously the other way besides migration in and out to change the population is births, and we have a overall decline in family size that's national and international, but we also, at least according to our data, seem to have a higher proportion of people who have two parents, but it's two couples that have no children. Is there anything that is actually is relevant to that as a policy lever? And how do you account for how people are going to make these decisions 20 years from now?
Sure. All right. Okay, so I'm on the spot. Didn't wide range. Okay, one thing I want to say is that the cost of housing is an important, it's a really important policy issue. And I do think it matters for migration. I think it matters for family formation. And there's a lot of discussion both on the demand side of how do you make housing affordable. But something I try to emphasize, whenever I can, is the supply side of housing. The supply and demand in the housing market does work. Okay, and if we can make it easier to build. Especially in some of our most attractive areas in Michigan. I'm from Ann Arbor, where it's very difficult to build new housing. There's lots and lots of people who would love to live in Ann Arbor, and we don't build and make it possible to start a family in Ann Arbor. And I do think that if housing is more affordable for people to start families, we would probably see more of it. So.
Any other closing thoughts?
If you want to tell me more of your opinions, check out growingmichigan.org and find a listening tour stop near you. I would love to hear it, I promise.
I don't have anything. I didn't react. I just would say you're singing from the Citizens Research Council hymn book, so I don't have anything.
You covered it so well, I almost didn't need to speak.
Great, we'll have the PowerPoints online at IPPSR.msu.edu, and we are. And there's recording as well, so you can watch this or send it to friends. And we hope to see you next time on October 11th. And if you have ideas for future forums or panelists, please let us know.